The pine trees along rural Route 7 outside of Robeson County, North Carolina, do not care about secrets. They stand as they have always stood, tall, indifferent, their bark darkened by decades of coastal humidity, their roots drinking from red clay soil that holds everything given to it. In the summer of 1993, those trees witnessed something that would take 30 years to name properly. The kudzu grew over the fence posts. The tobacco fields dried and were harvested and dried again. Children who had not yet been born when it happened would grow into adults, have children of their own, and still the truth sat buried. Not in the ground, not exactly, but in the particular silence that descends when a community cannot bring itself to believe what it already suspects. Her name was Lena Mae Caldwell. She was 31 years old. She had brown hair cut just below her ears, a gap between her two front teeth that she covered with her hand whenever something struck her as genuinely funny, and a habit of humming old gospel hymns while she washed dishes in the evenings. She had two children, a boy named Marcus, who was 7, and a girl named Destiny, who had just turned for the previous April. She worked 3 mornings a week at the Piggly Wiggly off Highway 74, stocking shelves before the morning rush, and spent her afternoons making sure her children ate something green with dinner. She was, by every account that her neighbors would later give, a woman who took ordinary life seriously, who treated the unremarkable work of keeping a family fed and present as something close to sacred. On the morning of August 14, 1993, Lena Mae Caldwell was last seen alive by her neighbor, 72-year-old Eunice Pritchard, who watched Lena hang 2 sets of children's clothes on the line behind the house at approximately 8:45 in the morning. By noon, the clothes were still there. By 2 o'clock, the children had not been picked up from Vacation Bible School at Mount Zion Baptist Church, 3 miles down the road. By 6 o'clock that evening, when her husband, Raymond Caldwell, pulled his truck into the dirt driveway and found the back door standing open and his wife nowhere inside, the clothes on the line had dried completely, stiff in the August heat. The sleeves of Marcus's small red shirt lifted slightly in a breeze coming up from the creek. The question that Robeson County would spend the next 3 decades trying to answer was not simply where Lena Mae had gone. The question, the one that deputies asked themselves in the parking lot of the sheriff's office late at night, the one her mother pressed into her pillow every sleepless hour, was this: how does a woman disappear from her own backyard on a Tuesday morning, in a county where everyone knows everyone, without a single person hearing anything at all? August in Robeson County arrives like a slow, wet weight lowered onto everything. The air does not merely feel warm, it feels inhabited, thick with the smell of cut grass and standing water from the irrigation ditches that run alongside the tobacco fields. By 8 in the morning on August 14, 1993, the temperature at the Lumberton weather station had already reached 84 degrees. It would climb to 97 by mid-afternoon. Cicadas had been screaming from the tree line since before dawn. Lena Mae Caldwell had gotten up at 6:15 that morning, the same time she always did. Her neighbor Eunice Pritchard knew this because she could see Lena's kitchen window from her own back porch, and the light came on in that kitchen at the same time every morning, reliable as a clock. Lena made coffee, instant, in a green ceramic mug her sister had given her. She made oatmeal for the children and cut a banana into it because Marcus refused to eat oatmeal without banana, and she had learned long ago that some battles were not worth the mourning they would cost. Destiny ate 3 bites and declared herself finished, which was also routine. Raymond Caldwell had left for work at 6:15. He worked at a lumber processing facility outside of Fairmont, roughly 22 miles from the house, and his shift began at 7. He drove a 1988 Ford F-150, dark green, with a cracked side mirror on the passenger side that he had been meaning to replace since February. He kissed Lena on the cheek. His coworker Earl Simmons would later note that Raymond mentioned this specific detail unprompted, twice, in the days following her disappearance, and drove away down Route 7 while the morning sky was still pale and streaked with the last of the night. Marcus and Destiny were enrolled in a 2-week vacation Bible school program at Mount Zion Baptist Church. Lena dropped them there every morning at 8:30, drove back home, and used those quiet hours for housework, grocery planning, and the occasional telephone call to her mother, Eloise Fletcher, who lived 40 minutes away in Laurinburg. On the morning of August 14th, Lena dropped the children at 8:28. The church secretary, a meticulous woman named Dolores Marsh, logged arrivals in a spiral notebook she kept on the welcome table, and Marcus and Destiny Caldwell were noted at 8:28 alongside a small notation that read, "Mom looked tired." Dolores Marsh would carry that notation with her for the rest of her life. Lena drove home. She parked her car, a 1990 Chevrolet Cavalier, white, with a small plastic sunflower on the dashboard in the gravel beside the house. Eunice Pritchard saw her arrive. She saw Lena go inside and then, perhaps 20 minutes later, come back out with a laundry basket. She watched Lena hang the clothes on the line, 2 pairs of children's shorts, a small red shirt belonging to Marcus, a purple dress belonging to Destiny, and what Eunice believed was a dish towel. Eunice went back inside to watch her morning program at approximately 8:50. She did not see Lena go back into the house. She did not hear anything unusual. She did not hear a vehicle she didn't recognize. She did not hear a voice raised, a door slammed, a screen door bang on its frame. She heard nothing. That, as it would turn out, was the most important thing Eunice Pritchard had to offer. At 2:15, when no one came to collect Marcus and Destiny from Bible school, Dolores Marsh called the Caldwell home. The phone rang 11 times. She waited 20 minutes and called again. She then called Raymond Caldwell's workplace, where a receptionist told her that Raymond was still on the floor and couldn't come to the phone. She left a message. The message sat on a yellow notepad on the reception desk for 40 minutes before someone thought to walk it out to the lumber floor. Raymond Caldwell received the note at approximately 3:10 and left Fairmont immediately, arriving at the church at 3:47. He loaded the children into his truck. According to Dolores Marsh, who watched from the doorway, Raymond asked Marcus if he knew where Mommy was. Marcus shook his head. Destiny was eating a graham cracker. Raymond drove home. The back door was standing open, not fully open, but ajar, perhaps 4 inches, the way a door stands when someone has not pulled it fully shut behind them. The laundry on the line was stiff and dry. The green coffee mug was on the counter, rinsed. The oatmeal pot had been washed and set in the drying rack. The house was, in Raymond's own words, given later to the Robeson County Sheriff's Department, like she just stepped out for a second. He called her mother. He called her sister in Fayetteville. He walked the yard and called her name twice, which Eunice Pritchard heard from her kitchen window. He then called the Robeson County Sheriff's Department at 5:52 in the evening. The dispatcher noted in the call log that the caller's voice was calm and measured, a detail that would be circled in ink 18 months later, when investigators went back through every piece of paper they had generated in the first 48 hours. The swing in the backyard hung still. The toy truck Marcus had left in the dirt lay on its side, one plastic wheel pointing at the sky. Deputies arrived at 6:17. They walked the property with flashlights as the August evening folded in around them, warm and buzzing with insects, the smell of the creek rising as the temperature dropped. They found nothing. No signs of a physical altercation. No blood. No scattered personal items. No indication that anyone other than Lena Mae Caldwell had been in that backyard that morning. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her car keys were hanging on the hook by the back door. Her shoes, canvas sneakers, white with a yellow stripe, were beside the back steps. She had walked out of her yard without her shoes, without her keys, without her purse, into an August morning that was already touching 90 degrees. And she had not come back. By the morning of August 15th, 1993, the Robeson County Sheriff's Department had classified Lena Mae Caldwell as a missing person and had begun what they would later describe in their official reports as a comprehensive area search. What that looked like in practice was a coordinated effort involving 12 deputies, 2 tracking dogs borrowed from the Hoke County Sheriff's Office, and a small but growing number of volunteers who had heard through the dense network of rural community gossip that a woman from Route 7 had not come home. The search party assembled at sunrise in the field behind the Caldwell property. The tracking dogs were given Lena's sneakers to scent from. They moved toward the creek, the same creek whose smell had drifted up through the August evening when the deputies first arrived. They followed the bank for roughly 300 yards before losing the scent near a gravel road crossing. The dogs circled. They did not pick the trail back up. The handler, a retired deputy named Frank Goines who had worked with search dogs for 20 years, told investigators that evening that in his experience, losing scent at a road crossing often indicated a vehicle. He could not say more than that. He wrote it in his notes. Those notes were filed. The community response was immediate and genuine in the way that small communities respond to the loss of one of their own, with food, with presence, with the particular helplessness that comes from caring deeply and being able to do very little. Mount Zion Baptist Church became an informal coordination center. Women brought casseroles. Men with ATVs offered to search the wood lines. Lena's mother, Eloise Fletcher, drove up from Laurinburg and sat in the Caldwell kitchen for 3 days, answering the phone every time it rang, her hands folded in her lap between calls as though she were praying, which she was. Raymond Caldwell was present throughout. He participated in the searches. He spoke to reporters from the Robesonian and from the Lumberton television affiliates who showed up on the second day. He stood in front of the cameras and described his wife, her humor, her dedication to the children, the way she hummed gospel songs while she worked. He asked anyone with information to come forward. He cried on camera. His eyes were red. His voice broke once briefly when he said her name. Deputies noticed several things, and to their credit, they wrote most of them down, even when they were not yet sure what the things meant. They noticed that Raymond Caldwell, when asked to describe his morning routine in detail, gave a consistent account on the first interview and a nearly identical account on the second, but with one small variation. In the first interview, conducted the evening of August 14th, he said he had left the house at 6:15, maybe 6:20. In the second interview, conducted the morning of the 16th, he said he had left at 6:15 exactly, and specified that he had checked the clock on the truck's dashboard. The odometer reading on the truck, taken by a deputy on the afternoon of the 15th when Raymond consented to a search of the vehicle, showed a total mileage that, when checked against the known distance to the lumber facility, was approximately 11 miles more than the round trip should have produced, and Raymond could not account for this discrepancy when asked. He said at the time that he sometimes took back roads to avoid the stop at the 74-130 intersection. The deputy noted this in his report. He did not pursue it further that day. They noticed that Lena's purse contained $63 in cash, her checkbook, her driver's license, a coupon organizer with coupons sorted by category, and a folded note in handwriting that investigators later confirmed was Lena's own. The note read, "Call Mama Wednesday. Ask about Jay." Investigators asked Raymond who Jay might be. He said he didn't know. Eloise Fletcher, when shown the note, went very quiet. She said she thought it might refer to a woman named Janelle, a distant cousin, but her voice carried something that the lead investigator on the case, Sergeant Doris Haywood, would later describe in her notes as hesitation that had nothing to do with the name itself. Sergeant Doris Haywood was a 17-year veteran of the Robeson County Sheriff's Department. She was 54 years old, methodical, and possessed of the specific patience that distinguishes investigators who solve cases from those who file them. She had 3 children of her own, all grown. She had worked missing persons cases before. She did not like this one from the beginning, and she would say so, years later, to a journalist from the Fayetteville Observer who would write about the case when it finally broke open. A woman who leaves without her shoes, without her keys, without her purse, in 90-degree August heat, either left in a tremendous hurry or she didn't leave on her own. Those were the 2 options, and the longer we went without finding her, the more one of them stopped making sense. On August 19th, 5 days after Lena's disappearance, investigators recovered a partial footprint in the mud along the creek bank, approximately 80 yards from the gravel road crossing where the tracking dogs had lost the scent. The footprint was consistent with a woman's size 7 shoe. Lena wore a 7.5, and appeared to indicate movement toward the water. They found no further prints. The creek was searched for 6 days using divers from the State Bureau's dive team. The divers found a rusted fishing lure, a child's bicycle wheel, and a section of drainage pipe. They did not find Lena Mae Caldwell. On August 26th, a maintenance worker at a rest stop along I-95, roughly 34 miles from the Caldwell property, reported finding a woman's bracelet in a trash receptacle, a thin gold chain bracelet with a small heart charm. Eloise Fletcher identified it as belonging to Lena. She had given it to her daughter for her 28th birthday. Lena wore it every day. How it had arrived at that rest stop trash can, discarded among gas station receipts and fast food containers, was a question that the investigation could not answer with the evidence available. Deputies whispered quietly, in the way that professionals in close-knit departments do when they have suspicions they cannot yet place into the official record, that the bracelet in the trash and the unexplained mileage on the truck pointed in the same direction. But suspicion is not evidence. In 1993, the forensic tools available to a county sheriff's department in rural North Carolina were limited in ways that would later be understood as decisive. There was no DNA database of the kind that would eventually transform investigations of this type. There were no cell phone records to subpoena, because neither Raymond nor Lena owned a cell phone. There were no surveillance cameras on Route 7 or at the rest stop on I-95. There was physical evidence that raised questions, and there were behavioral observations that raised more questions, and there was a husband who presented as a grieving man, and who had, as far as anyone could prove, gone to work at 6:15 in the morning and returned home to find his wife gone. Raymond Caldwell was never formally named as a suspect in the disappearance of Lena Mae Caldwell. He was interviewed 5 times between August 1993 and March 1994. Each time, he was cooperative, consistent in his grief, and careful in his answers. He hired an attorney in October 1993, a decision that raised eyebrows among those who knew him, though his attorney explained publicly that it was a precautionary measure that any person of interest would be advised to take. Those who knew him said that the Raymond they saw in those months was not the Raymond they had known before, that he seemed more contained, more deliberate, as though he had decided what shape his grief should take and was holding carefully to it. By the spring of 1994, the formal investigation had produced no arrest, no confirmed crime scene, no body, and no witnesses beyond what had already been gathered. The case was not closed. Cases involving a missing adult are rarely officially closed in North Carolina, but it slowed. Sergeant Haywood was reassigned to other active matters. The file was transferred to the Cold Case Unit, which at that time in Robeson County consisted of a single detective, 2 filing cabinets, and a shelf of evidence boxes in a back room that smelled of mildew and thyme. Lena Mae Caldwell's laundry had long since been taken down from the line. The little red shirt, the purple dress, the dish towel, folded by someone neighbors believed it was Eunice Pritchard herself, though she never said, and left on the Caldwell kitchen table. The swing in the backyard hung still. Time moves differently when you are waiting for something you cannot name. It does not pass so much as accumulate, like the sediment at the bottom of that creek behind the house, layer on layer, each year pressing down on the one before it until the weight of what has not been resolved becomes, in some ways, heavier than what was lost. Raymond Caldwell sold the house on Route 7 in November 1994, 15 months after Lena's disappearance. He moved with Marcus and Destiny to a rental property in Lumberton, closer to his mother, who helped with the children while he worked. The move was understood in the community. It was too hard to stay, people said, and there was generosity in allowing him that, but it was also noticed. Eloise Fletcher noticed it particularly. She drove to Lumberton every Saturday to see her grandchildren, and she told her sister, many years later, that those Saturday visits had a quality she could only describe as supervised. Though Raymond never explicitly denied her access or restricted what she and the children could discuss. It was something in the air, she said. Something in the way Raymond always found a reason to be nearby when she sat with Marcus and Destiny. Something in the way the children seemed to have learned, very early, that there were things one did not talk about. Marcus Caldwell was 7 when his mother disappeared. By the time he was 9, he had developed a habit of waking in the night and sitting at the top of the stairs in the dark, which his grandmother discovered one Saturday morning when she arrived early and found him there. He did not say why. When she asked, he shrugged in the way that children shrug when the honest answer is something they have been taught without being told not to say. She bought him a journal. He filled it with drawings rather than words, drawings that his grandmother kept, that she stored in a shoebox under her bed, and that she would eventually turn over to investigators. The drawings showed, with the unsettling directness of a child's hand, a house, a backyard, a stick figure of a woman, and in several versions, a dark shape near the tree line that could have been a person or could have been a shadow. Nobody asked Marcus Caldwell what the dark shape was for a very long time. Destiny Caldwell had turned 4 years old the previous April. She was 4 when her mother disappeared, and had, in the intervening years, developed what those who loved her described as a complicated relationship with what she remembered, and what she had been told she remembered. Memory in very young children is permeable in ways that make it difficult to know, years later, what was witnessed and what was absorbed from the atmosphere of a household that never quite told the truth about itself. What Destiny did carry, with a consistency that would eventually matter, was this: a recurring statement she made to her grandmother, beginning when she was approximately 6 years old and continuing at intervals through her childhood, that on the morning her mother disappeared, she had heard her daddy's truck come back. She said it the way children say things they believe to be unremarkable, not as a revelation, but as a fact. That she had been eating her oatmeal, that she had heard the truck, that her daddy had come back in and gone back out again. Eloise Fletcher had, on the first 2 occasions Destiny said this, asked her gently and carefully if she was sure, and Destiny had looked at her with the complete confidence of a child who does not yet understand why the adults in her life receive ordinary information as though it might break them. Then Destiny had returned to whatever she was doing, and Alois had sat very still for a moment, and then she had gone on, because there was nothing else to do in 1997 with the information that her 4-year-old granddaughter, now 7 years old, said she had heard a truck that a grown man had said was 22 miles away. Raymond remarried in 1999. His second wife, a woman named Carla, was from Whiteville. She had a daughter of her own from a previous relationship. She was, by all accounts that those who knew her gave, a decent woman who entered a complicated situation with genuine goodwill and gradually became aware of its full weight over the course of several years. The marriage lasted until 2004. The separation was described by those close to Carla as something she did not discuss in detail, but that required her to move quickly and take her daughter with her, and not look back. She gave one statement to investigators when the case eventually reopened, in which she said only that there had been moments in the marriage she could not explain, and that she had learned over 5 years that there was a Raymond she could see and a Raymond she could feel, and that they were not always the same person. For those who have ever sat across a table from someone they love and felt the particular cold of knowing that what they are saying and what is true are not the same thing, you will understand something of what Lena's mother carried through those years. The not knowing is a specific weight. It does not diminish with time. It changes shape, sometimes, takes up more space in some years, crowds into corners in others, but it does not lift. Alois Fletcher attended Sunday services at her church in Laurinburg every week without interruption from the summer of 1993 through the spring of 2022. Those who sat near her said she always remained for the full service, even when her knees made the wooden pew difficult. She kept a photograph of Lena in her wallet, a small school photograph that Lena had given her from some year in the mid-1980s, smiling with the gap between her teeth showing fully, because whatever joke had just been made before the camera clicked had been genuinely funny. The case file sat in its back room. The evidence boxes did not become less heavy for sitting undisturbed. The bracelet recovered from the I-95 rest stop, logged and sealed in its evidence bag in the summer of 1993, waited with the patience of objects that have no choice but to wait. In 2003, the Robeson County Sheriff's Department underwent a departmental reorganization, and as part of that process, cold case files were reviewed and cataloged. A deputy named Aaron Tillman, reviewing the Caldwell file as part of a routine inventory, flagged it for what he noted in his memo as several unresolved investigative threads of potential significance, specifically the odometer discrepancy, the recovered bracelet, and what he called the unexplored witness account, by which he meant Destiny Caldwell's statement to her grandmother, which Alois Fletcher had formally reported to the department in 1998, 5 years after the disappearance. When Destiny was 8 years old and had repeated the truck account for what Alois determined was the 4th time, Deputy Tillman's memo was acknowledged by his supervisor and placed in the file. Resources for cold case investigation were not available at that time. The file was reshelved. The silence held. The years passed, and somewhere in that passing, Marcus Caldwell grew into a man who did not sleep well and who had, since his early 20s, been quietly carrying a weight that would eventually become too heavy to hold in silence. It began, as the truth so often does after a long time of waiting, with a conversation that was not intended to be a confession, by a person who was not quite ready to confess, to someone who did not fully understand what they were hearing until they had heard all of it. In the spring of 2021, Marcus Caldwell was 35 years old. He lived in Cumberland County, worked as a diesel mechanic, had a daughter of his own, a 6-year-old named Aaliyah, and had, in the year prior, begun attending a grief support group at a community center in Fayetteville. The group was led by a licensed social worker named Patricia Owens, and it was not, technically, a grief support group in the traditional sense. It was a group designed for adults who had experienced traumatic loss in childhood and who were navigating what that loss had done to their adult lives. Marcus had been referred by a therapist he had begun seeing after his own marriage developed fractures he could not explain and could not repair. He spoke in the group, in the measured and careful way of a person who has spent 30 years calibrating how much truth to allow out at one time. He spoke about his mother. He spoke about the August morning. And in April of 2021, during a session that Patricia Owens would later describe to investigators as one of the most difficult and important conversations I have participated in, Marcus Caldwell said, for the first time outside of his own memory, that he had not been eating oatmeal when his father left the house that morning in August 1993. He had been standing at the kitchen window. He had seen his father's truck leave. And he had, perhaps 20 minutes later, seen it come back. He said he had been 7 years old and he had understood, with the specific comprehension of a child who knows more than anyone has told him, that he was not supposed to say this. He said he did not know what his father had done. He said he had spent 28 years knowing that there was something he was not saying, and that the weight of not saying it had become, in the year since his daughter turned 4, the age destiny had been that morning, something he could not carry any further. Patricia Owens, following mandatory reporting protocols that apply in North Carolina when new information emerges regarding a potential crime, contacted the Robeson County Sheriff's Department on April 19, 2021. The detective who received the initial call was a 20-year veteran named Rita Gaines, who had, by that point, developed a specialty in cold case review. She pulled the Caldwell file the same afternoon. She read Sergeant Doris Haywood's original notes. She read Deputy Aaron Tillman's 2003 memo. She read Alois Fletcher's 1998 statement regarding Destiny's account of the truck. She sat with all of it for a moment, looking at what 28 years of small, consistent, unacted-upon detail looked like when placed in a row. She called the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation that same evening. The formal reinvestigation of the Lena Mae Caldwell disappearance was opened on April 23, 2021. The case number was new. The evidence was old. The SBI assigned 2 agents to work alongside Detective Gaines, Agent Lawrence Webb, a specialist in cold case forensic review, and Agent Sandra Park, who had worked 11 cases involving family violence and disappearance over a 20-year career. They reviewed the original evidence with modern forensic capability that had not existed in 1993. The bracelet recovered from the I-95 rest stop was re-examined. A partial DNA profile was developed from biological material on the clasp material that had been preserved in the sealed evidence bag for nearly 3 decades, and that, in 1993, there had been no technology to analyze in any meaningful way. The profile was run through CODIS, the national database that had grown, in the intervening decades, into one of the most significant tools available to investigators working exactly this kind of case. The result came back in early July 2021. The partial profile was not a match to Lena Mae Caldwell. It was not a match to any known individual in the database. But it was, with a statistical significance that the SBI's forensic lab characterized as highly probative, consistent with a male contributor who had handled the bracelet. The investigators returned to the odometer discrepancy. In 2021, they had access to something that had not existed in 1993, satellite mapping capable of identifying every possible route between the Caldwell property on Route 7 and the lumber facility in Fairmont, including every back road, service road, and unpaved connector path, with precise mileage for each. The route that Raymond Caldwell had described, the back road variation he said he took to avoid the Highway 74 intersection, added, at most, 2 miles to the trip. The odometer discrepancy documented by the deputy in August 1993 was 11 miles. No combination of alternative routes between those 2 points produced a difference of 11 miles. The rest stop on I-95 where the bracelet had been recovered was from the Caldwell property on Route 7, a distance that, using the service roads and back routes accessible from that area, could be covered and returned from in approximately 45 minutes. Raymond Caldwell stated departure time of 6:15 and arrival time at the lumber facility, confirmed by his time card as 7:03, allowed for a window of 48 minutes. The mathematics were not comfortable. Destiny Caldwell, now 32 years old and living in Raleigh, was interviewed by Agent Park in August 2021. She sat across a table in a quiet conference room and spoke with the directness of a person who has spent a lifetime being uncertain about her own memory and has arrived, finally, at the place where she trusts what she knows. She said, "I was 4 years old and I know what a truck sounds like. I grew up with that truck. I heard it leave and then I heard it come back. And then it left again. And I have been saying that since I was 6 years old to anyone who would write it down." Marcus was interviewed separately. He sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him, and he answered every question that the agents asked. And when they asked him to describe what he had seen from the kitchen window on the morning of August 14, 1993, he looked at the wall behind the agent's head and said, in a voice that was even and deliberate and entirely without drama, "I saw my daddy's truck come back. I saw him go into the backyard. I did not see my mother after that. And I was 7 years old and I did not understand what that meant, but I understood that I was not supposed to say it, and so I didn't." He paused. He said, "For a long time I told myself maybe I was wrong, but I have a daughter now and she is 4 years old, and when she asks me where her grandmother is, I am going to be able to tell her the truth. That is why I am here." Raymond Caldwell was arrested on October 14, 2021, at his residence in Brunswick County, North Carolina, where he had been living since 2011. A retirement-age man with a small house near the water, a fishing license, and a life that had, from the outside, the appearance of peace. The arrest was made by agents of the North Carolina SBI, accompanied by Brunswick County deputies, at approximately 7:30 in the morning. Raymond was in his yard when they arrived, standing near a truck, dark blue this time rather than dark green, looking at the sky the way older men sometimes look at the sky in the early morning as though calculating the weather. He was 63 years old. He was charged with the murder of Lena Mae Caldwell. According to the agents present at the arrest, he said nothing when they read him his rights. He stood very still. His face did not do anything that those watching were able to interpret clearly. One of the agents present, speaking later to a reporter from the Raleigh News and Observer, described it this way. He had the kind of quiet that doesn't come from shock. It comes from a person who knew a day was coming for a very long time and had decided, somewhere along the way, how they were going to meet it. The news moved through Robeson County in the way that significant news moves through a community that has been holding a question for nearly 30 years. With a strange mixture of relief and grief, with the particular ache of validation that comes too late to help the person who needed it most. At Mount Zion Baptist Church, Dolers Marsh, now in her mid-70s, retired from her position as church secretary but still present at Sunday services every week, sat down in her usual pew and cried for the first time. She told her daughter, since the day in August 1993, when she had watched 2 small children wait to be picked up by a mother who would never come. She had kept that spiral notebook. She had never thrown it away. The entry for August 14, 1993 still read, "Mom looked tired." Eunice Pritchard had died in 2009, and those who had known her said she had never stopped watching from her back porch, never quite stopped expecting to see something that would explain what she had not heard that morning. She had told her family in the last years of her life that she felt guilty for not hearing anything, as though the absence of sound were itself a failure of attention. Those who loved her had told her she was wrong, and they had been right, and she had not quite believed them. The public response to the arrest was not unanimous. Raymond Caldwell had, in the years following Lena's disappearance, built a second life convincing enough that there were people, co-workers, neighbors, members of a church he had attended in Brunswick County, who said they could not reconcile the man they knew with what he was charged with doing. He talked about his first wife sometimes. One of his Brunswick County neighbors told a local television station, said she had gone missing, said it had been the hardest thing of his life. The neighbor paused, the camera kept running. The neighbor said, "I believed him." There were others who had never believed him. Lena's sister, a woman named Lena Mae Caldwell Price, who had spent 28 years watching her mother grow old with unanswered grief, gave a statement to the press outside the Robeson County courthouse on the day Raymond's charges were formally announced. She stood in the October light, which was the clear, dry, particular light of a North Carolina fall, nothing like the wet August heat of 1993, entirely different in character, as though the weather too understood that something had shifted. She said, "My sister hung laundry on the line that morning. She had plans for the day. She was going to call our mama on Wednesday. She was not planning to go anywhere." She paused. She looked directly at the camera. She said, "We have been waiting to say her name in the right context for 28 years. Lena Mae Caldwell was here. She mattered, and whoever decided she didn't matter was wrong." Raymond Caldwell was held without bond pending trial. The case proceeded through the North Carolina court system with the particular deliberateness of a case built on circumstantial evidence accumulated over 3 decades. Evidence that was, in the assessment of legal observers who followed the proceedings, more substantial than such cases typically produce, but which presented the jury with the challenge inherent in all cases where a body has never been recovered. North Carolina law allows for prosecution of homicide charges without physical remains when the totality of evidence supports that conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt, and the assistant district attorney assigned to the case, a methodical and precise attorney named David Marsh. No relation to Dollars, though he had grown up in Robeson County and knew the name, spent 8 months building exactly that case. The trial began in June 2022. It lasted 11 days. The jury heard from Marcus Caldwell, who sat in the witness box and gave his testimony in the same even voice with which he had given it to the agents 9 months earlier, and who did not look at his father while he spoke. The jury heard from Destiny Caldwell, who looked at her father directly and recounted every time she had told the truth about the truck, beginning when she was 6 years old, and who said at the end of her testimony, "I always knew what I heard. I just needed someone to believe me." The jury heard from Alois Fletcher, 83 years old, moving with the assistance of a cane, her voice steady in the way of a person who has been steeled by decades of waiting, who described every Saturday visit to Lumberton, every conversation with her grandchildren, every small and significant moment in 28 years of carrying a loss that had no official explanation. She held her composure through the entirety of her testimony. She broke it only once briefly at the end, when the prosecutor asked her to identify the photograph of Lena shown to the jury, the one with the gap between the teeth showing, taken sometime in the mid-1980s before any of this had happened, when Lena was young and whatever had made her laugh that day was still making her laugh. Eloise Fletcher looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she said, quietly and without dramatics, "That's my daughter." The jury deliberated for 2 days. On June 24, 2022, Raymond Caldwell was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Lena Mae Caldwell. He was sentenced to a period of imprisonment that the judge, in his sentencing remarks, characterized as appropriate to the deliberate and sustained nature of the harm that had extended not only to Lena Mae Caldwell, but to the children who had grown up in its shadow, to the mother who had spent 28 years without an answer, to a community that had held a question that no one with the power to answer it had been willing to answer. Raymond Caldwell did not speak at sentencing. He sat in the same composed stillness with which he had stood in his yard on the morning of October 14, 2021, and had said nothing. His attorney spoke on his behalf. The courtroom was full. Renee Caldwell Price sat in the front row with her hands in her lap. Marcus and Destiny sat beside her. They did not hold hands, but they sat close enough that their shoulders touched. The swing in the backyard of the house on Route 7 had long since been removed. A different family lived there now. They had repainted the house and put a garden along the back fence where the laundry line used to stand. They had no way of knowing what the air above that garden had once held, or what ordinary Tuesday morning had once been interrupted there, or what 30 years of silence had felt like to the people who loved the woman who had last stood in that yard and then had not come back. But the truth, when it finally arrived, had arrived with the clarity that truth carries when it has been waiting long enough. Not loudly, not dramatically. In a conference room, in a voice that was even and deliberate, from a 35-year-old man with a daughter who was 4 years old, who had decided that some weights are not meant to be carried forever. What does a case like this mean? It means that the things children see and say and draw in journals and repeat at intervals over the course of their childhoods, those things are not nothing. It means that evidence preserved carefully in a sealed bag for 28 years, held in a back room that smelled of mildew and time, can still speak when the technology finally arrives to hear it. It means that a woman who hummed gospel songs while she washed dishes, who cut banana into oatmeal because her son refused it any other way, who was planning to call her mother on Wednesday, that woman was not forgotten. Even in the decades when the world had moved on and her file had been reshelved and her name had stopped appearing in any newspaper. She was not forgotten because her mother went to church every Sunday for 30 years with her photograph in her wallet. She was not forgotten because her daughter kept saying the same true thing about a truck she had heard with her own ears. She was not forgotten because her son, at 35 years old, walked into a room and finally said the words out loud. Lena Mae Caldwell deserved to be remembered. She deserved to be named in the right context. She deserved the specific justice of having the truth placed, formally and permanently, into the record. She has it now. For Lena Mae Caldwell, for Eloise, for Marcus, for Destiny, for every person still holding an unanswered question about someone they loved.